Welcome back to the Farm Steward. This is the Woodruff Farms. It's Mud Prairie. It's a historic prairie that's in the center of the farm, and I've learned a lot about farming just from this prairie. It doesn't really sound like the normal place to learn about farming, but on this farm it's about conservation. It's about lack of inputs, I guess, is the key there. Is we want to make this farm as efficient as possible, and that means working in the laws of nature and farming more like nature. You'll see a lot of different things that you probably won't see on a normal corn and beans farm, but corn and soybeans are still part of this farm, and those laws of nature play out in ecosystem services. So I'm going to take you through this is kind of like a canvas of what agriculture means to me and what I've learned and applying it to this farm. When we also started farming this ground back in the late 50s, early 60s, we plowed, and just like every other farmer did, we plowed. The prairie was plowed under, and that's how we started. That's what we had to do, or at least we thought we had to do, to learn how to manage the weeds to grow the corn and soybeans. But the thing was, here we had an area where we found a camp. It was an Indian camp. There were flint chips in literally piles of them, where the Native Americans lived with this prairie for thousands and thousands of years, and they lived off this prairie. They lived off the timber, but the prairie was a service, and the more I got into studying prairies, I realized how much of a service it was. And this being an oak savanna, well, two of the main staples of the natives that lived in here, which were mound builders, would have been the oak savanna had nuts, and those mound builders would move through this area, but this was a village, and they would burn off the prairie, and that would create what's called an oak bush. So it was easy to harvest these oak nuts, and they made a type of bread that they lived off of, and the Indian grass was an augmentation to that bread. But the small grass prairies, I learned with the help of Bill McLean, was another mentor of mine with the prairie, with the Illinois State Historic Natural Heritage biologist, and we learned that the forbs that are in a small grass prairie, most all those forbs are a medicine. So not only did they have food from the prairie, they had medicine from the prairie and wildlife from the prairie. This was a vast wildlife area. There are remnants of that from the stones that we find that they hunted. A lot of birds and rabbits and game. It was plentiful, and we're seeing that come back now with this. That's another ecosystem service that the Native Americans took advantage of, and that we could be taking advantage of. That is a natural service if we just were more stewards of the land. While I call this a prairie, it actually is an oak savanna, and a savanna is just a question of a small amount of trees spaced out amongst a prairie. But the key thing to remember here, even if it's a savanna or a prairie, it's a system, and that it's about developing support for the entire system. And one of the benefits of this type of system is it supports a lot of diverse habitat as well. And when we restored this prairie, we restored it in the form of a tall grass prairie and a small grass prairie. And a tall grass prairie has a lot more dense grass, and it's big blue stem, little blue stem, or big blue, little blue, Indian grass, gamma grass, a little bit of switchgrass, but they're tall grasses, and they're established mainly to support the grass with some movement of forbs into them. But a small grass prairie is buffalo grass and little blue stem, and this one's been invaded by some tall grass prairies, but it was established as a small grass prairie, and that effect has helped to bring on more forbs and more flowering plants, but that brings on more food for the diverse type of habitat. And that also, the small grass prairie offers more movement, so a lot more quail, turkey and pheasant can breed and escape and live in this type of environment, because it does support the moving patterns and the breeding patterns, and in a lot better way than maybe a corn and soybean would, because of it's here for 6 months, 3 months, and then it's gone, and then it's just an open environment. So this really supports a lot of quail, a lot of pheasant, a lot of turkey, a lot of rabbits, and it's just food and shelter. You can really see the difference in the tall grass prairie, and the fact of the height of the grass, the thickness of the grass, that it really has a huge coverage. Well, that huge coverage really pays benefits in that root growth as well, because what you see above ground, you see more underground in that support. So this tall grass is doing a lot of functional good underground. But that support doesn't end underground and the grass above ground. This support goes into the atmosphere as well. This is a great carbon sink. So this is a great solution to our climate change issues. This is taking that carbon monoxide from the atmosphere and depositing it deep into the soil where it can be protected. And that is a great, another ecosystem service. In front, you see the row of hazelnuts, and they're really starting to take off. But behind was the staple for the Native Americans that we talked about. This is a post oak, and the post oaks are a low tannic nut, so it's easier for us to digest. Certain oak species take a 4-stomach rumen to be able to digest it, and it's just not a food source. But this post oak and some black oaks and some other oaks are more low tannic acid, and they're a potential that could go into, say, a restoration project like this and still be a food source if potential needs to be. In an oak savanna, you can have perennial shrubs, and they're part of a prairie as well, and when they are capable, a prairie is maintained by its burning, and these hazelnuts or filberts, Nutella, maybe you might recognize it as, is a product of those multi-species systems, and it harvests just like a regular crop harvest, and you have yields year after year, and you take and harvest the nuts, and these nuts can store, so we can actually use this as a food source. And so as I have propagated rows through the prairie, these continue to grow, and there'll be a harvest, and they are starting to be a harvest. Another aspect of a prairie is what you see above ground is a massive coverage and a tall growth. There's not a bare spot left on top of the soil, so there's no exposure. But what you see above ground is also below ground. These roots have complete coverages. They're all connected together, so they act like a sponge, and they help to regulate the soil and to keep it a living organism that functions in a healthy way and functions the whole system. So prairie is a good example of what a healthy soil and what a healthy system is supposed to be. It's a very diverse and completely covered, and it has a lot of life going on all the time, 24/7, 12 months out of the year. The services that a prairie provides does not just end in the prairie. Those communities and those systems that live next to the prairie have benefits as well. And this was the main reason why we invested in the prairie to begin with. We built the pond, and we were farming next to the pond, and it was filling in at a rapid rate, and we wanted to protect it. So originally we started off just with a strip of grass, and that wasn't really doing the job, and it got farther, and we decided to protect this pond because we swim in it, we eat the fish from it, and it was a big investment, and we wanted to protect it, so we signed up the prairie into a CRP contract, and this is the 30 years later. We've had 2 re-enrollments, and now it's a CRP CSP contract, but what it really is a service to the pond as well as a service to the prairie. The pond has great visibility, no more runoff. In fact, the soils and the root systems and the above ground all function as a sponge in the prairie, and that sponge has turned into regenerating springs to feed the pond. So when a big rain comes, this doesn't really fluctuate that much. It stays pretty much the same. If it's a large rain, it will bring it up, but it'll bring it up in a clear way, but it continues to flow weeks later through the springs. In fact, it stays constant as opposed to a normal pond. So there are benefits that come from the services of the prairie to the ecosystem of the water and the wetland. And this is the prairie pond coming to an end of about a 2-hour rain. We'll check the range gauge, but it has gone up some. Actually, it was a deficit going into this, and it's maybe, that's probably about 5 inches, 6 inches higher than it normally is, or it was. So it's about just flowing into the pipe, obviously, from what the drainage was. This will give you some idea as to the volume of water that gets soaked up into the pond. This is the flow that's coming off of the prairie pond. So most of all of this rain has been absorbed into the prairie, so you're not seeing that much runoff. And what runoff that is coming off, it's pretty clear. A prairie system has a great deal of diversity to it, and when I say diversity, one example would be pollinators. And it's one thing to have a pollinator, but plants are only flowering a certain time during the year, so you need a diverse group of pollinators that are coming on at different seasons to keep those pollinators in place, that they want to live here and that they want to be here to pollinate the soybean flower or anything else, the fruit trees. You need to keep a diverse crop of pollinators. It's just one example of an ecosystem service that you would find in a prairie.